Hi, in this video, I want to tell you about one of the best things that I ever did in my classroom to help my kids become excited about books, about authors, and about reading. We didn't have any special name for it. We just called it Choose a Book. Here's how it worked. Every single morning when my students walked into the classroom, they would be greeted by two picture books that were displayed on these little display stands. So you can see I have two books here. I always pick the books based on an author. I started out with an author of the week, and then I discovered that having an author every 2 weeks worked out better. So I tried to use authors that had written at least 10 different picture books. And then over the course of the 2 weeks, my students were exposed to 10 picture books by that particular author. So every morning when they came in, they would see these two books, and there would be a basket of Unifix cubes, and they would pull one Unifix cube out of the basket and put it in front of the book that they wanted me to read during morning meeting that day. Then during morning meeting, I would look to see which book had the highest stack, which one received the most votes. That's the book that I would read aloud. So in this case, I would take Jacqueline Woodson's book, The Other Side. That would be our morning read aloud. And then my helper of the day would go back to the Unifix cubes, break them up, put them back in a basket, and then they would go to the author basket and pull out another book. So maybe they would put another book by Jacqueline Woodson, Each Kindness, over there. And those would sit out for the next day. And on the next morning, students would come in and vote again. So even if a book didn't get voted on today, it might have a chance to be voted on the following day. So lots of great things happened through this daily ritual, this read aloud ritual. It became not a formal author study, but kind of like a little mini author study. Unintentional at first, but it became super intentional after I saw what was happening, because my students started noticing patterns. They would notice patterns in the author's illustration styles. Like they noticed that Leo Leone always used collage to illustrate his pictures. They noticed writers' craft techniques. Like they noticed that Jane Yolen and Eve Bunting loved to use a lot of figurative language. They noticed the content, things like Tommy DePaula always would write about his family from the old country, or write about his Italian and his Irish ancestors, and Patricia Polacco would write about her relatives from the old country. And so they just started to notice these things. It transferred into other parts of the day. Every school librarian that I ever worked with would come to me at some point and say, you know, your students, what are you doing in your classroom? You're doing something intentionally, because your students always come in and they ask for specific authors. They want to know where those authors' books are located in the library. So I knew that they were having conversations beyond our morning meeting. I also noticed that my students started trying to use some of the techniques that they noticed from these authors in their own writing, because I started doing something really intentional. When we noticed something during read aloud, I would say, wow, I wonder if we could try that in our writing. It wasn't an assignment. It was simply an invitation. We noticed, I invited them. And then if a student tried using that in their own writing, of course, we would celebrate, and I would notice it for the whole class. And then more and more students would try that out. So one of the very best things that I did, the only thing I had to do to prep ahead of time was go to the library, and I'd scan through to find a section of the picture books or illustrated fiction. And illustrated fiction is for older students. It's usually another section of the library. These books here would be considered illustrated fiction. And I'd look to see authors who'd written at least 10 picture books. Doesn't mean that authors who have written fewer books than that don't count, or that we never read them. We just didn't do it for our Choose a Book time. So I just go gather those books, and I got to know my public librarians really well. And they would usually let me keep the books out for 6 weeks. So every 6 weeks, I'd go and get 3 more authors. Eventually, I just started ordering books through Scholastic book clubs around these authors, so that I didn't have to go to the library quite as much. Another ritual really that grew out of this was our displaying authors. So every time I introduced a new author, for our little author study, I would write the author's name on one of these little books and hang it up in the classroom. So as the year went on, we had this growing core of authors that my students had been introduced to. So we have our books that we're reading, we're being introduced to authors. So I just want to encourage you to try out a ritual like this. Honestly, I didn't used to call it a ritual. I didn't call it a ritual until I read Mary Lee Hahn's book, Reconsidering Read Aloud. And in this book, she talked about incorporating read aloud rituals to bind our students together as a community of readers and to really engage them as readers and get them excited about reading. And so when I looked around my classroom, I noticed that this was one of my most powerful rituals. I have a whole bunch more that I'd love to share with you. So maybe in the comments or shoot me an email if you'd like to hear about some more of them. But this one was the most powerful one. So I just wanted to show you something else here. I was in a teacher's classroom who tried this out, and she found these are napkin holders at IKEA. And they were like $2 at IKEA. I'm not sure if you can still get them or not. But what I love about this is you can stick the books right inside, and because they're clear, you can see right through it, and it holds the books up nice and straight. So whatever you decide to call it, whether you call it Choose a Book or you come up with some more clever title, whether you display it on these display stands or the napkin holders, I'd love to hear if you try this out in your classroom, or if you have other read aloud rituals that your students have really benefited from. Please share those. So share those in the comments below.